Hello, and welcome to another edition of Grown Folks Business on this Thursday evening. We're missing some of the usual suspects, but we have one that is always in the space and always makes wonderful contributions. That's Bob. Danya is always doing what he's doing. He's controlling the wheels that keep us spinning and moving along. So we have a topic tonight that I don't necessarily have to have a big audience for. I have thoughts and ideas that I think we can unpack a little, and it'll be an abbreviated show. I have another engagement that I need to get to, but for the time being, we'll have a little bit of a discussion. If you're at home watching, feel free to chime in. I'll read your comments. We just keep on going the way we know how. So tonight's topic is what separates us humans from the beasts. Simple question, complex answer, and to be honest, I've asked people and not gotten the responses that would seemingly make sense for every point in time this is asked. Everybody has a different opinion or observation about this, what makes us different from the beast. Of course, I have my thoughts, but right now it'll be just Bob and I. We'll go back and forth for a little bit on a couple questions, but take your time, answer the best way you can, and as I stated, when we wind down, we'll get out of here and I'll get to that other engagement. But if you're out there in Cyberland and you want to join us, follow the links to do so, or just type in some good words and we'll take it from there. So Bob, good to see you, of course. What separates us from humans? I mean, what separates us humans from beasts? What separates us?
Always good to be here. And I guess you're specifically asking me that question. It's an interesting question when you think about it. Different times of the day, or different times in terms of what you just read or what you just heard on the news, or what a friend of yours just told you about, or something that you just experienced, because it have that question. If you lay that question on top of things that we experience, then how we react to those experiences actually makes us think about it, and makes us really consider that in a way that we don't just walk around day in and day out thinking about that kind of question. And there's an element of self-awareness that's always been said to me as kind of the key differentiator between humans and non-humans, in that we can actually consider and evaluate and make choices based upon our own interests, or our own going against what might be otherwise instinct, or training, or sense of survival, and that sort of thing. We can actually make choices that put us at odds with those instincts, that are instincts that we think are the instincts that drive animal behavior and so forth. You would say compassion is something that separates us, but in the animal kingdom, where animals live in herds, where they have mates, where they have children, many species show compassion. They show organization skills in terms of how they choose to function in a herd. They show compassion for their mates. They show compassion for their children. They show compassion even for others in their herds. So, and if you think about that, you can also make the argument that there's illustration of actually more and longer term organizational success by the animals in those ways than there are with humans. Because
I would even tack on really quickly for that compassion element, even a dog is aware in some measure of being compassionate to even a human being.
Right.
There's some understanding there.
That's exactly right. And you know, you could argue that animals have actually a more refined sense of survival of a species and doing what's best for the herd and doing what's best for the family than we do.
That's a very interesting take. And I think the most weight that holds is based on what truly separates us. And you mentioned a number of things. I'm glad you didn't go down the scientific road, because that's the easy one. We're not talking about what composition makes us humans versus animals, or the opposable thumb thing that people like to bring up. We're a little bit deeper than that. So to your point, my biggest observation concerning what separates us is reason. Our ability to reason, our ability to be reasonable, to communicate, to establish norms in our structures that allow for rules, regulations, rewards, not just survival of the fittest. We create dynamics that make for potentially better societies, understanding that this person's tool set means that they would most likely be successful doing this thing, or they find their way to it. This guy, a physical specimen who's an athlete, of course, he finds his way to being by some way, shape, or form, possibly a entertainer of some sort in sports. But we make sense of all of that. We reason out why it makes sense for this person to be that person to be this person. And I think that's the point of negotiation in terms of what makes humans different. We figured that out. Now, to again go back to what you were saying, I'll ask you this: how do we still find ourselves in wars? How does that happen?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We have these numerous enhanced capacities for certain. The challenge question is, how well do we use them? And to what extent do we use them to affect quality of life for the general community of human beings, versus how do we use them to separate ourselves out? Or how do we use them to take advantage of other people? Or how do we use them? You know, an interesting comment about solving world hunger. We have the money to do it. And so arguably it can be done. Well, challenge question. How do you get money in corrupt countries to the hungry people when the governments are corrupt and the leaders are corrupt, who will simply want that money for themselves? That's a challenge. That's a practical challenge that money can't solve. That's a human challenge. That's a practical challenge that money can't solve. So, again, how well do we go about using these enhanced capabilities for the good versus for the war or for the greed, or simply to have more each for ourselves?
Yeah, so I think that's the process. That's the thing that we look for to make sense of it all. But we clearly are vulnerable to, as you just mentioned, corruption, strong men who desire to control whatever the resources are to maximize profit and to make sure that they're comfortable by whatever measure. So again, that kind of answers the question of how we end up in wars, because there's going to be somebody that stirs the pot to an extent that reason, that reasonableness, that ability to reason goes out the window, and the only thing that at some point during that process makes sense is bloodshed or a tearing down of somebody else's structure, that whole way of doing things.
Yeah, in the animal world, we don't talk about the concept of free will that we talk about in the human world. And free will is really what is conceived as making our choices valuable. If we don't have free will, we don't own our choices. We just are doing what we do because it's what we do. And there's no good or bad in that. It's simply doing what we do. In order for something to be categorized as a good thing or a done well thing, we have to have the freedom to have done the opposite. We have to have the freedom to have done the other thing. And we have to have the freedom to choose to do the good thing, to choose to do the right thing, or it has no value. It only has value if we have the choice to do otherwise.
So that level of consciousness is another thing that's mentioned when it comes to separating humans from the animals. So you're talking about a ability to process what you experience. Oh, we didn't like how that turned out, so let's do this thing over here and do it better. But again, we run into that glass ceiling or that impediment that exists in our human selves, because when reason runs out, you rush towards, I think, in some ways, just the idea of being right.
Yeah, and I think in the animal kingdom, those worlds have been programmed to operate in a way that works out best it can. That doesn't mean everybody will survive. It means some will die, some will get killed, some will get eaten. But there's an aspect of it that at the end of the day, all of that works out best it can by following the programming, following the instincts, following the nature of the animals, and following the built-in judgment of the animals in terms of how they interact with each other. With humans, it's all up for grabs.
Yeah.
And I think what we've not done very well is really, we've got all this history, and Felton, you as well as anybody can talk about the history of the philosophers and the Stoics and all of these people that have contemplated how we can have better societies over the course of centuries. And yet look at where we are today in 2022, specifically in the United States, which claims itself to be the most advanced, the most morally right, the most this, the most that, the most the other thing, exceptional place. And yet we have all of the strife around all of the topics that we have. We have hunger. We have 2 counties out of over 3,000 in the United States where the average income exceeds what is necessary for basic necessities of living. 2 counties in the entire country whose average income is above that number. 2 counties in 2022 in all the United States. 2 counties. It's just unfathomable that we have. When you look at healthcare, where you look at mortality, you look at child mortality, you look at morbidity, look at all of those things, we're also RANs. And yet, what do we claim to be ourselves? And what do we really have the opportunity to be? And why have we so missed the mark on that? And why do we have so many of the social issues and social strife that we have in 2022?
So with that being the thought, and my animal analogy for everything you just mentioned is generally a snake eating its tail. I mean, it's having a meal, but it's devouring itself. That's how I base any thought processing of animality in terms of us knowing better and not doing better. we're continuously eating our tail. At some point, we run out of what we're eating. So yeah, we need to do better. We need to make better decisions. A big part of that is the next question, and I know you have thoughts on it. We've talked about this before. You know, it's near and dear to me because I pride myself on being understood or attempting to be understood. I literally, most recently, I'm just bringing some kids into the Parish Fellowship in honor of Portia Parish, near and dear friend. And I told them coming in that one of my primary objectives in terms of dealing with them and what I desire to see as a benefit gain or great outcome is working on communication, understanding the importance of communication across all, whether you're writing something, email and texting, whatever, or verbally speaking. Communication is super important. So I'll ask you, because I feel that you're a good communicator, what are the benefits of being a good communicator? And you can apply your answer to how that should be able to help us improve. Unfortunately, don't know if it will, but you can apply your answer into the realm of everything you just discussed before you took a break.
I think that being a good communicator involves being empathetic. It involves being empathetic to your audience. Understanding how your audience is apt to best hear things accurately, and then communicate it in a way that speaks to that. I think that understanding how to be effective in your role in life, whatever that role might be, is critically important. And we're an organization of organizations. We are a nation of organizations. And in multiple levels of whatever organizations you want to talk about. And so organizations have to have principles, they have to have values, they have to have processes and whatnot that build and reinforce and reflect those principles and values. All of that has to be clearly understood and bought into by the members of the organization, because anytime you don't have that, you're going to have fracturing. And if you really want to have a healthy, well-functioning organization, you can't have fracturing. You can have disagreement, but you can't have fracturing. But that all requires understanding and a buy-in to the principles and values. And that's something that we in this country do not have in so many places. And in my judgment, my opinion, that's reflective of poor leadership. And poor leadership is, I think, most often revealed by an inability to accurately and compellingly communicate. The job is not talking in ways that makes you popular. That popularity, just like social media, the job for social media is to gain attention share. Well, that's not, there's nothing helpful, there's nothing beneficial around.
Nothing is validated by being able to walk on your hands through the mall without falling over. And for some reason, we give that person a platform, and then we expect more without them having to have done more. It really, just because you get a lot of attention, just somebody that we need to talk to, and we want your opinion on matters.
That's right. And being popular unto itself is of no value. Having years of experience of itself is of no value. Having lots of activity unto itself is of no value. The question is, how effective are you? What kind of results are you achieving? And how do you go about accomplishing that? And results come from finding new and better ways to do things and educating people on the value of those new and better ways, not simply trying to polish off an old way that was very popular.
Absolutely. So the thing that resonates the most when you brought in, structures and government and how communication is vital to proper functionality. We know from, I'll say recent because it's in our lifetimes, the whole unpacking of the miscommunications and the failures to communicate in just period. When 9/11 happened, you find out that these agencies who knew a little about this and a little about that, and FBI knew a little, CIA, they were not in enough conversation and communication to not allow for that travesty to take place. They could have prevented it had they been in better communication. That's an easy example, but that's how critical communication is.
That's right.
And that's something that clearly separates us from animals, and it is a human thing. I mean that in the sense, I don't know and not certain if a dog can talk to a bird, but I do know that I can find some way to communicate with someone from China who doesn't speak English, and me, I don't speak Mandarin. So that is possible just because we understand each other from a somewhat human dynamic and aspect. We can negotiate and figure something out. We can reason with one another about something, even if we don't speak the same language. That's, to me, how powerful being a human is. So I had another question, and as I stated, we're gonna get out of here a little early so I can get to some political stuff. But wait a minute, I have a question. Oh yeah, this was a good one, and this was based on some of my most recent experiences in the political realm. Just in general, when somebody says this statement, it kind of just gives me like, what, especially when it's something very critical being discussed, or there's a moment, or the topic's extremely important. So, is agreeing to disagree really a substantive option when it comes to critical matters? Now, we can all say we agree to disagree when it's about whether, I was going to say Magic Johnson, I'm dating myself, whether, I was going to say Kobe Bryant, RIP, whether LeBron James, who's still playing basketball, was fouled or not. We can argue about that, and we can, no, it wasn't a foul. Yeah, that was a foul. We can agree to disagree. But when it's something substantive, when it is something critical and important, is agreeing to disagree, is it a real thing? And I'm asking you because you're here, but I'm asking you because I know you have a clear processing on a question such as that. And that'll be the last question, but take your time, and I probably have something to say back.
Well, yeah, that's really an interesting. I will say that on matters of substance, or matters of meaning, or matters that matter, I don't think I ever actually let go, and I don't ever. I might rather say, okay, I accept for the moment that we're disagreeing. I recognize that we are disagreeing. We are disagreeing. So I will acknowledge that. I'm not going to though going to agree to it. I'm not going to say that, because at some point we'll come back to this. At some point we'll come back to this. At the end of the day, I feel like reasonable, intelligent people ought to be able to come to a common place on things that matter. And if we can come to terms with values and principles as shared, then one approach is going to support those, another approach is not. And if you're about results and about effectiveness, you can also measure strategies based upon the extent of which they achieve results or they don't. They achieve effectiveness or they don't. So, and then you can't argue with that, right?
You're not supposed to be able to argue with a lot of things. That's the whole, like, that's
yeah.
disgusting. Like, how do you find yourself in that place where you can actually say, we'll agree.
I'll give you a great example. I think that people on this in the audience here or on this call could recognize. A lot of people are in sales, and in sales, so many organizations manage salespeople on the basis of activity. They say, you make 100 phone calls, you get 20 appointments, and you get 5 sales. That's how you do it. That's the recipe. Okay. So what about the person that makes 10 phone calls, gets 10 appointments, and 10 sales? That's who I want. That's who I want. That's the most efficient way to do it. And the numbers prove that out. If you make 100 phone calls, you get 20 appointments, and you sell 5, you've been a lot busier, but you've got less results than the guy that's been more effective. And you can't argue that. You sold 5, you sold 10, 10's better than 5. I mean, that's the only, but in so many sales organizations, they're all about measuring activity. And they'll even say to the guy that's making 200 calls, that's selling nothing, you're doing great. No, you're not. You're not selling anything.
Yes. The example that I have, for one, I've done the sales thing, so I understand that dynamic also. But production, period, right? There's this misnomer, and I have a wonderful example from when I was in printing. If you're showing that you produce this much because this machine is running 1,200 feet per minute, and we based everything off of this machine producing product at 1,200 feet per minute. Okay, but if it's not quality product, then what are we doing?
Right.
If you're spending all of the shift trying to get the machine to run quality product at 1,200, when you can just run efficiently at 800, what are we doing?
Right.
I used to be in the warehouse plant, whatever you want to call it, and I would have my machine running at an efficient speed, but producing quality product. And the supervisor would come by and he would just speed it up and then walk away laughing like, yeah, we got to get a little bit more out of that.
Well, and I
have to stop the machine and clean something. Then I have to stop the machine and do something else. So,
and see, that's exactly where values and principles come in, because if you're just measuring speed and you've not imposed the elements of efficiency, the elements of quality, the elements of okay, it's going that fast, but now it broke down, so I've got to do all this. If you're not counting all this, which are the values and principles? So
That's,
you've
that's
got
the reason.
you've got to more clearly define what you're about and say, okay, it'll run this fast, but are you getting anything out of it when it's running that fast?
That's where reason comes in, right? Taking it back, kind of circling back to what we're talking about, what separates us from the animals. We should reason as human beings that it makes more sense to be efficient and produce quality product that we can actually sell than to run a bunch of waste to try to reach some goal that's not really reachable. The best answer I received as to why it was silly for us to have a goal of running 1,200 feet per minute was from the people who built the machine, who built that press, who installed that press, the engineers who were from Germany. They said, well, Felton, your car has a speedometer that probably says about 120 on it, right? Goes up to 120, 140, 160, whatever. He said, do you drive your car that fast? You know you can, but do you do that? So, yeah, you didn't have to convince me, because I know when I run that machine at 1,200, I got ink flying everywhere. I got messes and things that just make my life that much harder. But they've decided that this is, as you stated, those 10 calls that to there's 100 people. It's just the way that it's been calculated in their mind, which is absent reason. It's just a formula that says that this is the most efficient way to function. Even what does it remove? The human element. It removes that guy who's likable, who knows how to talk to people, who's going to get those 10 sales the first 10 times. It removes him from the equation, and it tries to make everybody the same. So maybe it's kind of animalistic, huh? Maybe it takes away our humanity. I'm going to begin to wrap this up. I'm going to give you the final word, of course, and get to this other thing. I appreciate you as always. I appreciate everybody out there that's tuning in. And I know it's a light audience tonight, but I don't mind making it work. If I have somebody on the line, we'll make some good observations, comments, and all that good stuff, and we'll find our way through this thing. But agree to disagree, or one of my family members who I love near and dear, he used to grate me when he would say, that's debatable. He doesn't say it anymore, so I appreciate it, because everything's not debatable. Everything can't be agreed and disagree on. It's just not the way we should function, especially when matters are critical in nature. Has to be some understanding had. So, Bob, I'll give you the last word before we get out of here.
I think the only thing I want to say is that I think that the experiment around human beings is still out there, and I think that the critical thing for humans is the need for leadership, and true leadership, not people that run around getting elected that call themselves leaders, or people that get their egos stroked and they're now managers of an organization, or now they've done. It's not about that. It's about stepping up to be someone that's doing leadership for the right reasons, and doing it because they're capable of it, and doing of it because they're giving as leaders, not taking as leaders. And where they consider themselves stewards of an enterprise, stewards of an organization, stewards of a town, stewards of a county, stewards of a state, and they truly look at themselves as that. And we're just so far away from that these days. I have to say, I worry about how we reclaim some space there. But I think that is the task.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, to your earlier point about the hundreds of years, it's been millennia, this discussion, this conversation, this trying to understand and figure out why we don't do better together, why we don't make sustained societies and civilizations that actually are still thriving. That myth of Atlantis, why can't we make that a reality? I greatly appreciate you, Bob. Danya, always appreciate you for what you do here in this space. Everybody enjoy your Thursday evening. Have a wonderful one. Bob, you want to say something else before we get out of here?
Just enjoyed it. Y'all take care.
All right, everybody take care. Y'all have a wonderful evening. Thanks.